It's been 20 years since 19 terrorists linked to the Al-Qaeda militant group hijacked 4 American airplanes and carried out suicide missions against targets in the United States. 2 of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon, and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in the terrorist attack. The terrorists were allegedly acting in retaliation for America's support of Israel and its continued military presence in the Middle East. Since those attacks, the U.S. holds anniversary ceremonies on the 11th of September each year to remember the victims. The victims included police officers and firefighters who were responding to the attack. Well, the 2001 attacks in New York triggered major U.S. initiatives to combat terrorism. In Somalia, the U.S. has routinely carried out airstrikes against Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militants. Washington also recently redeployed hundreds of troops back to Somalia to help the African nation combat terrorism. The joint U.S. and Somali counter-terrorism efforts are also aimed at halting Al-Shabaab's cross-border attacks in Ethiopia. Here in Kenya, a U.S.-funded joint terrorism task force is in operation. The engagement seeks to boost the country's security and regional security. Kenya had been hit hard by several terror attacks in recent years, but managed to prevent many more such attacks. In early February, a U.S.-led counter-terrorism training program for 10 African forces took place in Cote d'Ivoire. Well, for an in-depth discussion over the impact 9/11 has had on an anti-terrorism efforts, I'm now joined by Dr. Ndu Nwokolo via Zoom. He's the managing partner and chief executive in Nextier SPD, an international consulting firm working in Nigeria and the African region. Dr. Ndu, thank you for joining us on the program. 9/11 had a big impact on U.S. efforts to combat terrorism abroad, including here in Africa. What has been the impact of U.S. counter-terrorism activities on the continent?
Thank you, Beatrice. I think the impact has been both positive and negative, but it will equally be important for us to draw a link between the U.S. fight against terror in places like Afghanistan and how it has triggered what is happening in Africa. What we saw is that organizations like ISIS and all that relocated into Africa, occupying places like Mali, the Sahel, the East Africa, and as well as reinforcing what we had in Somalia. What we had is that the U.S. increased its efforts in Africa, but in turn, Africa now became a fertile ground for increased activities of terror. What we're seeing is that violent extremism has increased, Islamic extremism has increased. In return, what the U.S. has done is that it has increased its activities like training, materials, and other things. But some states in Africa as well, in the inability to protect their citizens, has equally been impacted more by the way they've handled it, which has led to a lot of human rights violations in Africa. So it is here and there. We wouldn't say it has been bad. The impact has been both negative, the impact has equally been positive.
Well, militant groups, though, continue to operate in several parts of Africa, you know, in North Africa, in the Sahel region, in East Africa, in Nigeria. Despite the counterterrorism efforts by the United States and its allies, is it perhaps time for new strategies?
I think so. I think it's a time for new strategy, being that what we are seeing, that even though the US and the West tend to want to do a lot for Africa, they have not been doing what we could say a match for what we have on ground. So where we think the kinetic force we've been using have not been doing enough. So we might start re-strategizing, mostly looking at how we can use developmental efforts to start solving the issues. Because if we look at issues of terrorism in Africa, it has a link with the nature of the state, it has a link with development, it has a nature with the way we govern ourselves. So if we start solving those things that are non-kinetic, maybe we can find a way to start reducing the use of force in solving it.
And looking at those several Al-Qaeda-linked terror groups operating here in East Africa, in West Africa, in the Sahel, as you have said, these places became fertile grounds for global terror networks. How can this be mitigated?
I think we need to start looking at a lot of issues. For instance, most of these African states have issues of local grievances that we've not solved. local grievances such as how water, natural resources are managed. We have issues of governance, we have issues of accountability, we have issues of corruption. So as we start dealing with deconstructing our state and start solving the internal issues within the African states and the way we manage our internal security structures, probably it will help us to start dealing with this thing. Because internally, you find out that issues of lack of inclusion have led to some people who live in the periphery, especially where people who enjoy the presence of states are the ones who live in the capital. So it now means that those who live outside the capital are easy draw in for these terror groups to use them and fight the states.
All right, Dr. Ndu Nwokolo joining us there via Zoom. Thank you.